Welcome to another show of Hutch on Hunting. And today I've got a special guest, Mr. Brad Felger. Brad lives up in Montana part of the year, and he's got a wonderful camp down in Panama, which I haven't had the opportunity to go to yet, but I will be heading that way because he has surf fishing, he has surfing because he has a quiver of surfboards, and there's some pretty good fishing offshore down in the Panama area. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And folks, falconry, and we're going to get into this during the show, has been around for thousands of years, thousands in Europe, in China, and Brad's going to give us some history of how long falconry's been around. But you see princes and kings from Egypt and, like I said, China, and they got birds on the arm, and they did this for sport. They just did this for food, and it's a sport that, like I said, is thousands of years old. So, Brad, starting right off with the show, let's talk about why falcons, hawks, raptors were used in hunting.
Essentially, falconry began thousands of years in the Orient, and it was a method of catching food to feed people, and that went on until firearms and better bows and arrows and all this stuff were being utilized, and it still exists in, for example, in Mongolia. Still a tradition of falconry in Mongolia with Mongolian falconers that hunt their mainly golden eagles on quarry, such as foxes and even wolves and things like that. And but then it later on, many hundreds of years later, it became a sport of royalty, where it wasn't necessary for feeding someone's family. It was more of a king's enjoyment. And so they're basically over in Europe, your position in the kingdom, you could fly, like a gerfalcon was reserved for the king, and and so on and so on, down to the queen, and the flew the merlin, and I might be getting this wrong. It's been a while since I used to study this quite often. Huh? But basically, it was really, the noblemen flew the goshawk and the knight, and the common man could not fly those birds without serious repercussions, and it was basically an enjoyable sport, which it is. And then probably, I would say, 100 years ago, it came into the United States, and maybe a little less than 100 years ago, but it became and the United States is very very unique in that we have tremendous amount of land and opportunity to hunt, and so falconry is a hunting sport. Most of the world, it's not practiced to feed people anymore, feed people's families. It's practiced as a recreational thing, and it's become highly regulated through Department of Fish and Wildlife. And there's permits required, and we have to follow hunting seasons and things like that. But over here in the United States, there was great opportunities, and over the last several decades, especially starting about 100 years ago or 90 years ago or so, the people started to fly birds, and they just started to progress to where we are today. And I'd say without a doubt that United States has North America, let's just say, because there's some great falconers up in Canada, and there's some great falconers south border down in Mexico, and the the United States. We have great opportunities, and we have public lands, and we have where if you go over to Europe, it's really hard to access land because everything is pretty much owned and tied up, and unless you buy into that, you're owner of that land, or you buy into a big hunting lease kind of a thing, it's you can't afford to fly your bird. And it's the United States and North American in its entirety is really where falconry has taken a deep root, and we've brought it. Many people have brought it to really levels that have never been seen in, I don't think, in history. Things that people are doing with their birds now. For example, back just 40 years ago, say 40 years ago or so, we started to use telemetry on our birds. So it was a transmitter on the bird, and so that way we have a tracking transmitter on a falcon so we can tell which direction that falcon flew. And a lot of these flights go out of sight. And so you have to be able to, in the old days, you had a set of bells on, a bell on each leg of the bird, and you'd have to listen for the bell, use a lot of instinct to be able to find your bird if the flight went out of sight. Where now, with the telemetry starting, we had directional 3-element directional antennas, especially like on a 216 megahertz frequency, but so there are some other frequencies that are being used. And then in the last, I'm going to say a dozen years or so, GPS technology hit the falconry world. And now I look on my iPhone, I see where my bird is, I see a map, I see how high my bird is up in the sky. Even though, I'm getting older now, I'm 64, and so my eyes aren't what they used to be, but a lot of these flights will go, in or around 1,000 feet high, 800 feet, 1,000 feet, sometimes higher. And you just can't see a bird up there a lot of times, where with your GPS, you're looking at your phone and you're able to see exactly where your bird is, and if it's straight up above you, or if it's wandered a mile away, or where it is, or if it's standing on the ground somewhere. And you can tell all that. It's just, that gives you kind of a lot more confidence when it comes to the type of flights that you do with your bird, to be able to take chances that you would take 40 years ago with your falcon, where if you let your bird go 1,000 feet high and your bird caught something a mile away, I mean, good luck. Maybe you wouldn't find your bird, where now I know exactly where my bird is and I can get there fast. And so I'm going to take that flight. And really what falconry is about is not just hunting. It is hunting. And that is what falconry is hunting with a trained raptor on wild quarry under natural circumstances, would be what I would say a pretty good accurate definition of falconry. But it's more than hunting. It's catching quarry, but it's watching a flight. And so you tend to set up or orchestrate flights that are really appealing to watch. And everybody's kind of got their own idea of what they like to see. And when they fly their birds, that's what they are striving for. And so it's just as much the flight as it is the catch, although we all like to catch things.
Now let's talk about the catch. The only time I've seen falconry, you haven't invited me up to Montana, so I haven't been up there yet. But
You're always invited.
But you're never there. You're down in Panama. Anyway.
No. Yeah, not all. I'm there most of the year. I just came down here for a little bit. And I left right before the 40 below stuff hit.
There,
So
you're a smart
I
man.
escaped just in time. So there you go.
So getting back to my Carmen, I've seen birds, especially ducks. I lived on the Mississippi Flyway, taken out of the
Mhm.
air by, falcon. It just comes at and you'll tell me how fast, but it just hits the bird, and then, both the falcon and the duck, head to land. How do you control all that? Because if they're over water, ducks hang around water. How do you control that so the
Right.
falcon doesn't drown?
I've caught ducks that were knocked down by falcons. I used to have this, gosh, in the 80s, I had this prairie falcon that would hit things so hard. She'd come down, she would be up, 800, 900 or even 1,000 feet high, and come down and just hit a duck so hard it would just be floating on top of the pond. And then the bird would come and kind of grab the duck and sort of side stroke to shore with the duck in its feet. That's not typical. Typically, what we try to do is get ducks to, set up the flight to where, if we're hunting ducks, that it clears the water and goes over dry land. And so I've flown everywhere from small ponds to really large reservoirs, and it really takes an intelligent bird that has that experience to wait until the ducks clear the water before that bird really comes down and gives it a hit. And so starts its dive and comes down. Actually, the falcon dive is called a stoop. And so
A stoop?
before the falcon commits to the stooping on these ducks, an experienced falcon will wait and let those ducks clear the water, and then they come in and knock a bird out of the sky. So it's really, but on the other side of the coin, it's up to the falconer to make the correct decision on what a good flight is, and what, I mean, there's easy flights and there's hard flights, and you don't always want to fly easy for the rest of your life. It gets kind of too easy. You're hoping to step your bird into more and more challenging situations, and more and more challenging situations, and see some really incredible flights as a result. But if a bird knocks something down into the water, which does happen on occasion, usually a lot of times the ducks will dive into the water, or they'll do a turn across the pond, and that usually a experienced falcon will kind of pull off and go back up in the sky, and then wait till they clear and then come back down like that. But so I try not to fly. Well, you're talking the Mississippi River, and first of all, that wouldn't be a flight I would choose, just because with falcons, the method that we use for hunting for like ducks and upland game here in North America, falcons are flown differently in other parts of the world on a pursuit flight, or over in other parts of the world. But in North America, we have most of the quarry that we catch. We find the quarry. So we find like, let's say we're hunting ducks and we see a pond that has ducks, and then identify the ducks, and I go, that's a pond full of teal or coots or something that is either, or ruddy ducks or something that's not going to flush. So I'm going to pass that slip. I'm not going to take it. Or if it's teal, I'm going to really be careful, because teal have a tendency to make tremendous they'll dive into fences and into the ground and all sorts of things to avoid the falcon, where like other types of waterfowl will, give a good flight across the sky to outfly the birds. And that's what I look for. So I identify what the ducks are. I look at the situation. I see if there's a pond like 50 feet away, they're just going to dive into the next pond. I might not take that flight. I'm looking for something that or I figure out a way to flush that pond to where they're going to clear and go out over open. A river with the falcon up in the air. So once I locate the setup that I'm going to fly, then I let my bird go and I wait till that bird gets up real high, and then I walk in or I drive in. If I'm in my vehicle, sometimes I'll drive a little ways and then get out and walk. You sort of get closer to a pond sometimes if you're not walking before they flush, and then I'll run in and flush falcon comes down and hopefully catch something. Now, if it was a river or a stream or something like that, what ducks tend to do with a falcon that's above them up in the sky is they don't want to fly. They see that falcon up there and they don't really want to fly out over dry land. So unless unless it's like a brook or something that's fairly small, and I can have somebody downstream pinching it off for me to get these ducks to fly over dry land, I won't fly those setups with a falcon. I'll fly more of a pond reservoir type setup, or puddles that happen after rains in the winter time or something like that. Where if I'm hunting, say for example, a goshawk, that bird isn't taking a pitch like a falcon. It's sitting on my glove, and I'm coming in and I'm flushing ducks off of a ditch or a creek or a small narrow pond or something like that. But those ducks that hawk is on my fist, and it just power flies across and up into the flock of ducks to catch something. And those ducks are going to try and outclimb that bird because it's coming from behind and underneath. And that is different. I could fly, but I couldn't fly the Mississippi River with anything. I mean, that's just way too wide.
Just too big.
So, but wild falcons do it all the time. I mean, they work at it all day long, and they find one sitting duck or whatever you want to call it that wanders from the flock over dry land and just makes that mistake. And that's survival of the fittest, and that's how the strongest and smartest survive.
I mentioned, Mississippi River because I've seen hawks. I don't know if it was a falcon, but I'm just going to call it a hawk that's pecking on a duck that was knocked down. Obviously, it was wounded, but it never got retrieved. And there's a free meal because they saw it, they picked it up, and they just got on the duck and they're eating it. And that's kind of like sometimes when we're out hunting and a mistake's made, or you harvest your critter and you leave some of the stomach contents, and then the critters come in, the birds come in. Eagles love that, and coyotes come in.
Yeah.
So you see that all the time in the West, that nothing goes to waste. Nothing at all,
Right.
Goes to waste. And, you every once in a while you see eagles on carcasses out of Yellowstone because there's so many people and they see that, and, the wolves and the bears are on the same carcass. And so it makes it really interesting because you have these different predators that are all feeding off that carcass. And so, it's just interesting to see that. Now, how did Brad Felger get involved in the falcon industry?
Well, so like I said before, I started at an early age, and it was purely falconry as an enjoyment. And I'm even hesitant. I don't even know what to call it. Is it a sport or is it an art form? I've heard it called all sorts of things, the art of falconry or the sport of falconry. But it's really, it's a lifestyle, and it's really, one of these days I was thinking about writing an article about how falconry hasn't changed my life or affected me. I mean, I sit here and I choose where I live by where the good hunting spots are for my birds, rather than maybe what's the nicer house in a better area. I tend to, I've completely I have falconry has shaped where I live, what hours I work, so that I have time to fly my bird, you know, all sorts of things. So I flew birds for many years, and I was living in an area in the central coast of California. I was living near Paso Robles, California, the San Luis Obispo area, and the area was changing from rapidly changing from cattle country to wine country. And I was flying in different areas there. I was a full-time farrier, which is a horseshoer, for those that don't know what that is. So I was trimming horses' feet and putting shoes on them. I did that for 30 years. I full-time. It's very hard on your back, your elbows, your knees, your body, period. I love the work. But my body started to tell me after a certain amount of time that, you know, this isn't something you're going to grow old doing without, you know, I'm going to end up with, you know, not unable to do my job because of back problems or whatever. And so at the same time, this is probably starting around the early 90s, people started to ask me about, they were starting to have problems on their vineyards with birds. And I started to experiment flying my birds. I was just doing it not as for money or anything. I was just kind of doing it, checking it out, and experimenting with it. There weren't any permits drawn up for it yet. So I had my falconry permit, but it was really uncertain where the boundaries were on the falconry permit, on the legalities. And I had a full-time horseshoeing business. I made plenty of money doing that, and I didn't want to change anything. And then finally they came out with a permit for bird abatement using falconry, and I got that permit, and I decided to start pursuing it as an occupation. And that would be pretty much right around, it's probably 99 to year 2000, somewhere in there. And that was in the late 90s. I don't think it was 2000 yet. It was still in the 90s. And I started my permit. I started doing some work, and it just started to grow. And so I have a lot of friends that I've known for many years that are falconers, and I started finding contracts and putting them to work. And I kept my horseshoeing business going, and I actually didn't even take a paycheck for many years. I just put the money back in the business, paid everybody for the work they did, and anything that was profit I put back into the business, and it just kind of grew from there. And now I ended up letting my horseshoeing business expire. I decided to get out of that, so I kind of backed out of that and started running the full-time abatement business. And now I run it more like I'd say I'm more of a consultant, even though I will do a job here and there. For the most part, I'm too busy handling the business end of things and making sure that everything's running well, and with the contracts and all the other intricacies of running a business that seem to take all day and night, a lot. So it doesn't, you know, when I'm out on a blueberry farm or a vineyard and I'm trying to run the business, it's really difficult. And so that's why like I said, occasionally I'll do a job here and there. But I'm better off just doing what I do now and just running the business. So that's how that worked. And in the meantime, many years ago, probably, this would probably be in the early 90s, trying to think, 89 or 90, I went and got my raptor propagation permit, which is a Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife permit, which is the same as the abatement permit. Is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife permit also. And I started breeding peregrine falcons and some other types of falcons at my place. And that's highly regulated. Everything is documented and reported, and the birds that I breed have to go to other licensed falconers only. And so it's a real limited market, but it's something I do that I actually really enjoyed doing. And to this day, I still breed some falcons at my place.
So you have
So
a breeding part of your business, an abatement part of your business, and you shared with me some municipalities who call you and they get, on their guard landfills, let's call it that.
right,
They've got some bird problems. Or do you ever hunt rats on the landfills?
not on purpose.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's always, and that's the thing. Whenever somebody's doing anything with waste at all, there's what we're normally contracted to do. Like if we're doing a landfill, for example, we do many different industries. Landfills are just one of them, and we do many different forms of agriculture. Vineyards are just one form of the agriculture that we do. Anybody that needs bird protection or has bird problems, that's where we work. So back to the landfill, if normally we're there to chase gulls away, and that's probably the number one. And maybe starlings and crows can be a problem, but it's pretty much most of the landfills. The problem that they're contracting us for is to keep gulls away, and I mean, like, they get tens of thousands of gulls can be on a landfill, but at least thousands. And that is they're mandated to do something to control that. And so they try all these different methods, and they find out really falconry works better than anything else that they can do. And so it's become a popular form of and widely accepted form of bird control on these landfills. And so unlike falconry, where the objective is to catch things, and falconry is hunting, bird abatement is hazing and chasing away. And so a bird flying around scares gulls and keeps them at bay. And if you keep them away long enough, they have to find then they can't eat there. They have to find a food source somewhere else. And that is how that works. If there's 10,000 gulls or 2,000 gulls or whatever their level of problem is, first of all, gulls are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. They're actually protected birds. And so, but under our permit, we're allowed to chase them away. And if something were to be caught, our permit has conditions on that. So we're not breaking any laws for incidental catch. However, with that said, once again, I'd rather chase 1,000 gulls away than try to catch something, because it just, once a bird catches something, it kind of concludes things. It takes time to pick a bird up if it's caught something, and it's way more effective just to chase birds away. You can chase a whole flock of birds away all at once, and with a bird that shows good intent, and good falcons with a good strong wing beat can really get out and cover some sky and keep those birds quite a ways out, and do that for a period of time, and those birds start going somewhere else. Now, with that said, you talked about rats, and so let's go back to that. So if somebody were to set a bird on a hill or a pole or something like that, and that bird was going to sit there and just look around, that's kind of a non-proactive method that I have seen some people, not us, but others, use. To me, that at some point, that perched bird is going to notice a rat, as there's rats are in the garbage, and there's always some kind of rodents and stuff, and that's really a bad habit. So we try, like I said, we do everything we can to keep our birds, when we fly them, then we keep them flying. And then when it looks like they're done, we call them in and put them away, give them a rest, give them some food, give them a rest, and then fly them again later. So, but that way, that idleness doesn't allow them to go catch a rat or something, because, rats are, I don't know, they're disease carrying things I'd rather not. And they have big teeth that would be hard on a bird's toes, stuff like that. So we try not to catch things, especially rats.
What is your favorite memory of a hunt? You're out there, you got your bird, you're flying the bird, and what's your favorite, hunt that you can remember?
Well, I flew, wow, that's a tough one, because I've flown small birds, Merlins, and I had some phenomenal, back in the 80s, especially, I flew lots of Merlins, and, I was hunting mainly sparrows and starlings with them. And I had some, the most common quarry you can find that aren't regulated at all. I'm having a great time flying those and seeing some phenomenal flights. And then, I've had some male falcons. So first of all, males are about approximately a third smaller than females. And so tierce is a measure of size. I believe it's in Greek or Latin, one or the other. And so a tiercel falcon, so a tiercel peregrine is a male peregrine. And back then I was flying these Barbary falcons, which is essentially kind of a smallish desert, non-native peregrine. And I had a tiercel that I flew on doves, mourning doves during dove season. Those were spectacular flights. I mean, really amazing, very difficult. And so best memories, then I got into the flying ducks, and I've done that for several decades. And then I moved out of duck country into frozen country for upland game, and I've had some great flights and great times doing that. So I'd say the grouse hawking is the most challenging, and thus the most challenging. A lot of times mean the reward is great. Had some great flights, but I had a bird that I flew for 12 years named Sunny, and Sunny was a bird that I sent one of my birds to a friend of mine, and he put it with his female, and they made babies, and he gave me the first female that they produced, and she was a cross between a Barbary and a peregrine falcon, which are essentially closely related, but she was small for what she was. She flew at, I don't know, like 670 grams, which is, I'm going to throw out there and say it's probably 25 ounces, 26, 25 ounces, somewhere in there. And if you're measuring ounces, I do grams because it's very accurate. And that bird for 12 years had me looking at my alarm every morning. I'd wake up before my alarm went off, excited about what she was going to do. And that's rare. And I got 12 good seasons out of her. And then one day on a flight out in, when I moved to Washington, we have a real issue there with bald eagles. There's just a ton of them. And I flew somewhere where I didn't see any eagles, and she caught a mallard duck way out. And before I could get to her, some eagles came in. 5 of them came in at the same time and took her duck from her. And she lost an eye, and she became a breeding bird after that. She was lucky to survive. And so, but that bird, I might have sent you a picture of that bird standing on that mallard that looks so huge. That's Sunny. And the one with the 2 ringneck ducks next to her, that's Sunny. I mean, she'd come down, she'd fly so high that and she learned to follow my vehicle, so I could let her go and drive into an area and get out and walk in and use my receiver. This is before GPS was around, and I'd find that she was up there somewhere. And then I just flushed the pond and I watched the ducks, and she'd come down, and I mean, she's about 99.9% success. You know, she was just amazing bird. And I'd have to say, in my whole lifetime, she was the one. And I hope, and that's another thing that I'm coming to realize as I age in falconry, as I get older, and I've got so much more to experience, and I've only tipped the edge of the iceberg, and in all the years I've been flying birds, I got a lot. I know what I know, but I've got so much further to go and to learn, and it's still extremely exciting. But I've come to realize that if I get one more Sunny in my the rest of my life, I'll be very fortunate. But probably I might have experienced her, and I can't dwell on, I can't compare the future birds to her, because that's not fair to the next bird I get. Next bird's going to be different. And so, and I'm not flying ducks, I'm flying upland game now. And so that's a whole different setup. I got a pointing dog, and I got, fields that have upland game, and and it's a whole different setup than duck hunting with a bird.
Now,
So
if your bird's flying at 1,000 feet, sees quarry underneath them, how fast do they dive? What's their speed?
So the GPS allows us to see the speed, so we can finally see that. With that said, there's legend of the red baron being passed at however fast he was diving by a peregrine that was diving, and so I've heard that the legend has it that they can do better than they can do 300, but in a dive. But with that said, there's a guy that I became good friends with in Washington State who did something that is actually on a National Geographic special. And it's a guy named Ken Franklin. And he wanted to find out how fast a peregrine falcon could dive. And so he was a pilot, I believe it was for United, till he retired. And he used to fly his plane and all this. And he learned to skydive. And so he'd go up and skydive. He had these devices where they could measure the speed that the falcon was diving. And he'd do this, be falling with the bird. You should really Google that sometime. Just how fast can a peregrine falcon dive, National Geographic, and that will come up. It's a 10-minute video or something, and it's really interesting. And he goes up there with the National Geographic crew, and they all jump out of the airplane with the falcon, jumps out of they throw the falcon out the door, and they all dive at the same time, and they're falling at terminal velocity. And he's got this lure in his hand that's weighted to fall real fast. And the lure is what the falcon is trained to come to, and it's got food on it. And so that lure is falling. And I think they got about 180 miles an hour or something like that out of the dive. And at that time they were all excited. That was the top speed. Well, later on, and I was asked to do to bring a bird to a aviation association's meeting, and they had Ken Franklin was their guest speaker, and he didn't have a bird at the time, so he asked me to bring one of my birds, and I brought my bird in, and he did his presentation. I learned something that I did not know. Did you ever watch Point Break, the movie Point Break?
Yes.
With Patrick Swayze and okay.
Yep.
Remember the scene where Keanu Reeves jumps out of the airplane at the very end, and he has no parachute or anything, but he's got to catch up to him, and so
Right.
he goes absolutely prone.
Right.
That's what he did. He had to do that to get fast enough. He had to become aerodynamic to be fast enough to measure this bird's dive, and they got 242 miles an hour. That is, to this date, is, to my knowledge, is the highest recorded speed ever. When a bird's but they jumped from, I don't know, I'm going to say it was 20,000 feet or some insane height. You know, they were way up there, where you got a falcon coming from 1,000 feet. I'd say 150 is a really fast speed. 160, you know, somewhere in there is a really fast speed. They can only get going so fast from that height, where if they were 10,000 feet high, they have a lot further to fall, you know, to go. And so for what we do, we don't see 200 miles an hour, but we see really fast, you know, not much under, but definitely not 242 like
Now, how's their
they saw.
body? I understand that they have shields over their eyes. Is that true, or is that how does that work?
So they have a regular eyelid like we have, but then they have a membrane that goes from kind of from the inside to the back. So it's kind of like from your tear duct area. So toward from the beak end towards the back, and it kind of goes back, and it will kind of partially come across and keep the eyes from drying out or having just intense wind in them. And they also use that to keep their eyes moistened. They also have inside their nostril, falcons have, and these are falcons we're talking about. Hawks have a lot of this, but a little less. They don't have like the nair like a falcon has, where they have this little thing that looks like a little BB size thing sticking out of the nostril, and that buffers the air so that a bird can breathe at high speed. And, you know, remember that birds have hollow bones and they have air sacs. And so, like, we have lungs. And so we're, you know, if we were trying to flap our wings, and with the lungs we have, we wouldn't be able to do it. It's just, it's too much for us. We'd need what they have is air sacs, and their lungs are like, you know, every time they pump their wings, they push more air and more oxygen through their air sacs and all the blood vessels that absorb the oxygen. And so so falcons are really made for high altitude and high energy flights. It's really, the harder they work, the more oxygen goes into their body, where I think human lungs could have definitely a limit, which is way below what they have. And
Wow.
you know, you look at how a falcon flies compared to a soaring hawk that uses very little energy. They're different. But falcons are that's why I fly mostly falcons, because I've been I like hawks too. I love goshawks and some other hawks, but I've just really been hooked on flying falcons for a while. They're just exciting for me to fly. But that would be, I hope that answered your question
Yeah.
somewhat, as I took the long way around
No, you're so
on that.
interesting, you know, to talk to, because you've been doing this since the 70s. And where do you think the industry is going? Where do you think the future of falconry is going?
Well, you know, obviously there's a falconry license, and so we can kind of track and see how many falconers there are. And I'm not really up and accurate on what the number is currently, but I'd say that over the last decade, there was a while there where that number was dropping. And and it's not like we're trying to recruit falconers. I think that the majority of people are not made to be falconers. Most people think, oh, that's cool. They see a movie, you know, eagle huntress or some kind of, read the book about a lady with her, what was the one where the lady went through grieving her dad's death while she flew this goshawk, and it's another thing that hit a lot of people. But when you come right down to it, there's huge responsibilities, and there's absolutely no room for mediocrity, or you don't sort of be a falconer. You're either in or you're not. And you have a lot more to think about than yourself. You have the welfare of the animal that you're flying, and if it should not be a burden, it should be a love. And there's only so many people that are fit for that. With that said, all the hunting and fishing sports the numbers have dropped, I'd say, in the last 20 years. And recently, falconry has been on the increase. A lot of people that have been falconers are passing away. Everybody's getting old, and everybody faces that someday. And so for a while there, it was like, we're watching this happen where falconers are disappearing. They're passing away, and the numbers are others less than there was last year, and so on. And then we hit a tipping point seen, and it might be because of the bird abatement industry or some other things that get people into it. But I think I said down there's, there might be close to 6,000 falconers in the country, which when you compare that to, and my numbers, I would definitely fact check that one. And I'm not claiming that that's correct. I'm saying ish, approximately, where, 10 years ago, there was, less than 5,000 falconers in the country. And so I'd say it's growing a bit again, for whatever reason. So in going into the future, when I started falconry, it was very hard to get a falcon. You had to only get a bird from the wild. There was no captive breeding, and a lot of these birds were just off limits to get. Peregrine falcons, for example, were on the endangered species list many years ago, and now due to abolishment of DDT and some other harmful pesticides, and combined with the efforts of falconry communities, some universities, and biologists that have worked together, and did a peregrine falcon reintroduction program. The peregrine falcon is back at or above historical numbers. And so peregrines seem to do well around people, unlike some other raptors that are more secretive. And so you can go down to downtown Seattle and see peregrine falcons nesting on one of those high-rise buildings on a ledge. You'll see that, where another type of falcon, like a prairie falcon, for example, it really doesn't, it likes solitude, needs to be out in more of a desert area, and doesn't do well around a lot of people. And so the peregrine falcons have. And so they've made this huge comeback. And so as a result now, between captive breeding and there's a quota of birds that we're allowed to take for falconry across the United States. Each state has its own quota, but for licensed falconers only on a very limited basis, that's changing because the numbers of peregrines are now surpassing people's wildest dreams and expectations, to where they're back. And so the falconry take is so small compared to the number of birds that there are, that it's an insignificant number that will never in any sort of way be a negative effect on peregrine falcons. If anything, it gives the birds a a better chance. And then quite often people fly a bird for a couple of years and they release it, if it's a wild caught bird. So with that said, falconry today, we can get any bird we want because they're being captive bred, especially captive bred birds. It's easy to get. If you're a licensed falconer, you call somebody that breeds birds and you say, and I can legally sell bird to a licensed falconer as long as it's only captive bred birds. No, wild take birds, there's no money or anything involved in that whatsoever. It can't be used for abatement, can't be used for only for falconry. And and they can be, somebody has a bird that might go on a breeding project or something, but those birds never have a price tag on them or anything like that. It's all, they're wild birds. So there's a difference between that and captive bred birds. But with that said, I'm going back to what I was leading up to. Captive bred birds, you can get any bird you want. But the problem is, what am I going to hunt it on? And so that's the dilemma right now that I see in North American falconry is, we're kind of chewing up the frontier with, not to get into the whole thing, but you got windmill farms, you have solar farms, and I don't want to get into a big debate about green energy or anything, 'cause that's not the purpose of this show, but you have a multitude farming practices that have changed that have big effects on populations of game birds. And so good falconry organizations are becoming very involved in not only the welfare of wild raptors and, supporting like the reintroduction of the peregrine and now they're focusing on tropical raptors, California condors, and all sorts of things that need help. But a lot of focus is going to, like Ducks Unlimited needs to be supported and falconry community supports to keep wetlands healthy and further that cause so that the duck populations stay healthy. Upland game, with grouse and other upland game, be working on habitat and laws that and things that would protect their habitat, and ideally work with the farming and ranching community to figure out a way to get the best out of their farming and ranching, while at the same time leaving some habitat for game birds. So with that said, now I can get any bird I want, but now I don't have, I'll listen to some old guy tell me how good it was 20 years ago, and it's not that good anymore in this field. You should have been here back then. It was really good. And I'm like, well, okay, but what am I going to, so so with that said, I see falconry going in a direction that is going to go in the direction of available quarry. There's people right now, you have starlings, for example. They were introduced, it was like 1891 in Central Park. Some Shakespeare fanatics released, a couple hundred starlings and some English sparrows and skylarks and stuff, the birds of Shakespeare. And skylarks didn't do so well. English sparrows did good, but they found their niche, and it's more like Taco Bell and McDonald's. They don't hang out in crops. But you have starlings, and a couple hundred birds turned into hundreds of millions of birds that devastate crops. And so now you got people that'll fly these mega flocks with their merlins and other small falcons. Really exciting flight. That flight that's that's heavily super available, where maybe some kind of grouse or something isn't as available for them where they live. And so I always say, if you're a falconer, you figure out where you, unless you want to make a big sacrifice and move somewhere, figure out what quarry you have within a reasonable distance where you could go several times a week without a big inconvenience to fly and hunt your bird. Find out what that quarry is, and then choose a falcon or a hawk according to what you have available. And falconry will be very enjoyable for you, and you'll be very successful. That's where I think it's going into the future, as opposed to what's happening, in the last 10 or 20 years. I think things are going to change according to what quarry is available.
Thanks for that. And I'll jump right in with both feet on golden eagles out west.
Mm-hmm.
And if you kill a golden eagle, and if you're not First Nation, it's $250,000 fine. Yet,
wow. Okay.
When these windmills, and you can fact check that, and listeners, and these wind turbines, these wind generators, that if you do a cost basis analysis, don't have an ROI. They don't. And you can run the numbers yourself. But because
there's a depredation. I remember when this was happening, and I've seen a lot of the posts from outraged falconry community. And by the way, I just want to clarify something. Somebody that's a true falconer loves raptors and cares deeply about the welfare of the wild birds. And it's not somebody that it's not somebody that just wants to get a bird and doesn't care about anything in the wild. Falconers, I know, are very passionate about everything they see in the field, and they notice when something is different. Falconers are some of the first to notice it because they're out in the field so often. They'll go, what happened to this type of bird? I don't see this bird lately. What's going on? I mean, they notice that. And so anyways, but back to the eagle thing. So I've seen the posts of some very outraged falconers about the hypocrisy, or whatever we want to call it, regarding the green energy and the forgiveness that it's been given for a lot of things. For example, I saw a post from a falconer where this gal is carrying out this eagle that's just been cut to pieces it's been killed by you look at those big blades and they don't look like they're moving that fast, but that's because they're super long and they are just going fast. And this bird got killed, and she's carrying this bird out in her arms. It's dead. And the caption read, "If this bird was covered in oil, it would have been on the front page news." And you never see that on the news or anything. And yet it's happening I've heard some statistics, and I'm hesitant I would just encourage people to Google that and see what those numbers are, because I might have heard exaggerated numbers, but there's depredation permits that are issued to the wind farms through the Fish and Wildlife Service that allows a certain amount of birds for that to happen. I think there's technology around that would be a lot better utilized, that would be a lot safer for birds, because if you look at those places that they put the wind farms, a lot of times on those little canyons and ridges where the wind blows all the time, but it's also where migrating birds follow that route, and they come along and they end up right in the middle of a wind farm. And that is where, especially birds that are bigger, that are soaring, like an eagle that has to get some kind of lift. I mean, it flaps its wings and it moves fast, don't get me wrong, but to really cover some distance, they have to, there has to be, some thermaling and some updrafts and things that they follow those routes. And that happens to be right, a lot of times right where they want to put that wind farm. And so, yeah, it's definitely a dual standard. And it's, I've seen it, and I think that we're turning a blind eye to something that's happening that doesn't have to happen. I think we're intelligent human beings with high tech. We can come up with a solution, I'm sure.
Thanks for that, Brad. And we're coming up to the end of the show, and I wanted to just challenge everybody. If we care about wildlife, and we have something in America called the North American model
Correct.
of wildlife conservation, and falconry fits in there because the hunters are recreationalists that depend on habitat, they depend on other wild critters to enjoy what they enjoy. And it's up to all of us to take a part in that and make your voice heard. If it's important to you, let somebody know. And you say, well, my voice doesn't matter. Yes, your voice matters. Your vote matters. You matter. And you have to understand that. The days are gone by where we can stop or stand by and say, well, that's none of my business. Yes, it is your business. Final thoughts?
Yeah, falconry a handful of years ago was declared an international heritage. It is a part of history long before firearms, long before the United States existed, long before the kings and queens in Europe. It's been around for many thousands of years, and it's at this point there are groups of people that really kind of don't understand it so much, and what they don't understand sometimes they oppose. But if you really take time and check it out, you'll see that a falconer is as much a conservationist, if not more, than the majority of people that think they are. I mean, we are actively doing something to further habitat, to, every falconer I know has rehabilitated and successful and assisted rehabilitation, people that rehab birds and stuff, assisted them in helping to with equipment. And back in the day, before rehab organizations existed, I rehabilitate. The game warden used to bring me all kinds of birds, and I'd rehabilitate them, get them healthy, and release them back into the wild. I mean, we've all done things that are way above and beyond just I fly a bird. And so just remember that falconry comes with a lot of positive things, and the future of falconry is really important, because people that are trained and have dedicated their lives and devoted their lives to flying birds are the true experts in those fields, and the best people to have around when it comes to the welfare of raptors. And with that, I really appreciate you and your show and inviting me on. And the company that we have is called Airstrike Bird Control. And if you want to go online, you can look us up on a website and see what we're about. But I enjoy talking about falconry, and hopefully I'll fly. And see, I've been in it for 50 something years. Hopefully, well, I'm 64, so
You got a few
I
more
think
years.
I passed the halfway mark by quite a bit, but hopefully I got to do what I can to keep going. I love it as much as I did when I was a kid, and it's a good thing. So thanks,
So your
Bruce.
website
Appreciate
again?
it.
Yeah. So your website
Air,
again is
Airstrike Bird Control.
.com.
Yes.
All right. Brad, thank you so much. And this is Hutch on Hunting. And the biggest thing that I'm talking about now is Save the Hunt in Colorado. Dan Gates is the spearhead of that. And Save the Hunt Colorado, it's about defeating a potential ballot initiative that will ban cat hunting, mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx here in Colorado. And oh, by the way, lynx, you can't hunt lynx right now. They're endangered species. They were introduced in the 90s. I've never seen one in the wild. None of my friends have, but they're here because I know people have seen tracks. So reach out to SaveTheHuntColorado.com and find out what Dan Gates is doing so we don't lose our hunting heritage in Colorado. Yes, that's what the bill is about. It's not about cats. It's not about anything, but a group of people think they know better than the North American model of wildlife conservation, and they don't.
That's something that I would also make sure that we preserve that North American model. I've heard stories about or rumors about it being challenged in some states, and we really need to stay on top of that.
So with that, I'm Bruce Hutchin. HutchOnHunting.com is your digital scouting platform on the web where you can find out everything you want to know about hunting big game in Colorado. So this is Hutch out, and have a good day, everybody.